what I can do as a company is right there in the center. So there are things I can do, things I can control, things I can improve. Of course, there's a limit to that, but because there are also things that I cannot, and that is the environment around me. And the environment could be the whole demand-supply situation. If more people use capacitors within India, I have a bigger chance. If electronics grows in India at 30%, vis-a-vis 5% rest of the world, that's a fantastic environment for me to grow in. If my supply costs are more, my infrastructure is bad, then there is also a negative. And finally, there is how does the government or the policy-making mechanism of the government look at this whole thing? And that would form the outer shell of competitors as well. It is my belief that in a country like China, from a manufacturing perspective, they have pushed very, very hard on policy. And you see that the whole export drawback system is a beautifully thought of system to support, from a policy perspective, the fact that you become a huge manufacturer and a very, very large exporter. Not only they have this VAT refund mechanism, but a little before the global recession hit them, I also found that they have begun to reduce that refund. So whatever was not adding value, for example, if it is iron ore that they wanted, of course China does not export iron ore, but let's take an example like that, they would make that refund zero. So it was one very straight way of telling everybody that China is not interested in exporting iron ore. It's not competitive for them to do that. But if you added a little value of let's say 20% and just got them into hot rolled coils or whatever, then you would get a 25% of that refund. If you make that into a steel wire along with some zinc or an alloy, a little more value was added, you would get a 50% of that refund. And if you made a capacitor out of that whole thing, then you would get 100% of that refund. So what they were able to do is that just with that one policy, calibrate what they wanted to export, how much they wanted to export, quarter over quarter. And that policy still continues. Unfortunately, we don't have something like that supporting us in India. We have some other policies in place. CST, for example, the central sales tax is a ridiculous tax as far as I'm concerned. You are trying to put a tax on what is manufactured in the country but not what is imported. So obviously you're putting your own manufacturers against you. The big question is what does the country want to achieve at the end? But anyway, that's not the discussion this morning. It's my belief that the competitiveness, of course, just to put it into mathematics, of course the company plays the largest role because I put it here as an exponent of 3. The environment plays the second large role, or the second most significant role, and the policies take the least. However, I keep reminding the government that this is multiplication, it's a product. If any one of them is 0, then whatever I do at the company level will still become 0. So I can be very good at it, and I can try it. So what we are trying to do in India in a company like mine is make this far, far stronger so that we can overcome the great strength of the Chinese policy or the environment of cost benefit. So obviously we need to exert far more at a company level and try to do what you can at the policy and environment level. Good news is that last 4 or 5 years, we are also improving in India. So if that was a negative score or close to 0, we are getting better. Obviously not as well as the Chinese are doing that. But at the company level, I dare say that a lot of SMEs in India are outthinking the counterparts elsewhere in the world, especially in China. From a management perspective or from a business perspective. A lot of them are moving away from being small and medium into medium to large companies. A little bit of a model to sort of explain what I'm saying in a different way, and that's something that a colleague of mine in Netherlands I'm working on, like writing a book around this called Magic Magic. This model is called Magic Palette, so if you look at magicpalette.com, it gives you a tool on how to make everything great strategic decisions. What we are saying here is that most SMEs are a business that is manufacturing something or providing a service and passing on this to the next business. Somebody else. So typically, to me, SMEs are B2B businesses. There are very, very few examples of SMEs being B2C businesses. Which means that we need to understand the other business who does something with my component or part and passes on to the final consumer. Maybe in one go, or in the auto case, you can have, I give my capacity to a tier 3 supplier who gives it to tier 2, makes a horn out of it. The horn then goes into a dashboard assembly and then finally goes to somebody like BMW. So the whole chain, I play a very small role, but I need to understand how does my business, what are the elements of my business while I supply to my tier 2 supplier? What do they do with the tier 1 and with the final consumer? There are certain costs of means that every company has, and these are what I call comparative costs of resources. Very simply, I would call them 5 M's. So it's the cost of manpower, cost of money, cost of materials, cost of machinery, and finally the cost of mining. So those are the 5 M's that form this cost. They are a given. Very little that I can do as an SME about them. If the cost of manpower in this country is $100, that's so it is. But if $1,000, that's a given. cost of machinery, the cost of money is given because of the whole environment that we live in. What I do with that comes in this box that we call value added. In my opinion, there are only 5 things that anybody in the world can do. Any company, manufacturing company in the world can do. They can offer technology, they can do production, they can do some marketing, branding, or whatever you call it. They can provide some logistics, and finally they can give something called support, pre-sales or after-sales support. I don't know of a 6th thing that any company does in the world. Some of us choose, so a CNC manufacturer, tuck trim, whatever it's called, tuck make and trim kind of garments manufacturer, chooses not to do any of the other 4, but does only production, and hence gets the least amount of the value addition that's possible. Some other company says, oh, I will not only do that, but I will also do my own design. And so he combines in a way technology and production, and hence has a slightly higher share in that value addition process. And someone says, I will also take care of the inbound raw materials and outbound goods, and he starts doing technology, production, and logistics. If he can do his own branding, that's great, then he becomes almost a full service provider, and then he can do what we call TPLMS. If for each company to choose what I'm good at based on my cost of needs, what is the value that I can add, or what am I best wanting to do? And that's the kind of exercise that I did in my own company with our own people to get into something. Based on what my cost of needs plus the value addition I do, I'm able to transfer this pallet to the buyer at a certain cost of ownership, what you would call total cost of ownership. So you can argue that the total cost of ownership is not only the money he pays me, but the chance, the cost, again we talk of 5 C's, the chance that he takes in buying us from a new buyer, the chronology or the time he spends to select someone like this, the conflict he has when he's choosing a new buyer, etc. For that cost of ownership, he gets an equal benefit as well by buying it from us. To which he can further add some value. Maybe he uses it as a component or something. Again, TPLMS maybe, and gives it to the final consumer for some benefit, who also makes some sacrifice. So it's just a way of trying to understand whenever a product or a service changes hands, somebody pays for it, and he thinks it's worth $100, and I think as a manufacturer it's worth $100 to give it to him, because I still don't make some profit. And what's really going on in the minds of these two people? As you can imagine, a lot of this is perception. There are no mathematical formulas for it. And hence I believe that even as a small company, if I understand the value of that perception, this buyer would pay me more if I reduce it into mine, the cost of the chance he takes with someone like this. If my factory looks better, if I have an ISO 9000, if I take care of the environment, I have an ISO 14000, my people are in uniform, they have a prayer every morning at 9 o'clock. It gives them a lot of reliability factor when he visits a company like mine. And when he does that, in his mind the cost of chance, the cost of conflict, the cost of change comes down, which means he's willing to pay me a little more as a cost, vis-a-vis somebody in China. Because he doesn't see that same. So that's the element that I'm trying to make out of this. And you can see a lot more examples if you go to that website. That's the same, now in the details of TPLMS or 5M, 5 C's of the cost, what he gets, the benefits are here. This is the value we can add. This is the price that you as a final consumer is paying. When you buy a mango at Albertine or you buy a shirt at a Walmart, this is the price you're paying. You not only pay the price, but you're also paying for the risk of people who are involved in the whole business. The people factor, the planet, which is the environmental issues, and the profit, was it a fair trade practice or only some people make the money? When you buy a carpet, for example, actually you think you're paying the price, but you really are paying all this. And this is becoming more and more evident today. And that's why this model becomes far more relevant today, because a lot more buyers, not only in Europe, in US or in Japan, in developed countries, even in India, we are beginning to get a little concerned about issues like this. Okay. Now here's the story of what Nikki Electronics did, and I want to sort of bring in stories from elsewhere where we were inspired from as we go about it. You will find a lot of these, and I do this because so that I can remember all these in my dreams, in my sleep. So a lot of things, but we'll go to each one of them. But the most important one is participative management. You will remember that in the cost, there is a cost that is, you can call it a cost or you can call it a value, mind. I can treat my people, pay them $100 a month because that is the local minimum wages, and invite them to my factory every day to just leave their minds behind. Bring only your hands and your legs and your eyes, and come and sit here and do a visual inspection of a capacitor. Is this a good capacitor or a bad capacitor? That's all I want you to do. Don't use your brains because they're not required. Unfortunately, that's what a lot of SME entrepreneurs are doing in their business. They pay for the whole body, including the mind, but they use only the hands and the legs. This is a story about trying to use the mind not just the mind, the heart and the soul. I know it sounds like a lot of air, but hopefully with some examples I will put that to rest. So it's a lot about participating management. Let's go into the details. First and foremost, when I look at that chart, the India-China chart, I have taken, not today, but in 2005 was when we went to zero duty. 1994 was when I joined the company. So in 94 we tried to make, I had no idea what a capacitor, I was a hotel manager and I worked in a hotel license. This is a family business, circumstances being what they are. In India we believe a lot in karma and destiny, so we have somebody else to blame all the time. So I decided to take this plunge. When I got into the business, I started looking at some cost charts, whatever little I understood of this, and I said, this is a business that's going down very, very rapidly. Because as the duties will come down, the cost of capacity, the selling price of capacitors will go down. My cost will continue to go up. So if I draw a curve, in 2 or 3 years, my cost and sales graphs will meet, and after that, I'm going to lose money every year. The amount of money we have in the bank will last me 2 years at max. So what did I do with it? I decided to explain this to the 45 people who made the company at that time, including the security guard who had always been there. Everybody was in doubt saying, why are you wasting the time with the security guard with all these graphs? It was my firm belief that that guy needs to start showing up for work with his mind and his heart and his soul. He needs to understand what I come to work for every day, what he comes to work for every day. So that when we begin to move in that direction, and I was sharing with Sunil just a little while ago, in so many years of experience, I'm beginning to feel that I pay too much attention to speed and very less to direction. As I'm getting older and hopefully wiser, I think it's the direction that's far more important than the speed. Life is not a 100-meter dash, it's a marathon. And what's very important is, am I headed out in the right direction, or am I running very fast in the wrong direction? And sometimes that can happen. So what I decided to do, sort of by chance I would say, was started involving people in that whole journey, and started showing them this graph quarter over quarter. Spent a lot of time explaining to them what a profit and loss statement meant. We didn't get as far as balance sheet because it was too complicated for me to do. Some of them have not been to school. A lot of them were at school only till 10th grade level. The idea of the challenge was to draw a direct relationship between what that person did. What was the level of flow drops, which means the capacitors that fall off from your table onto the ground and go into the scrapyard. Now, how were you contributing by reducing that number to the graph that I keep showing you quarter on quarter? And it's been a fantastic journey. We have grown at 30% every year since 1994. Today, if I don't go to the factory for a year, I'm very happy to report we will grow at 30% even without my entering that company. Because that is the level of knowledge, the level of, I wouldn't even call it knowledge, the skill, the motivation that has been embedded in people like this. So learning on one hand, sharing the vision, and the vision was never that I wanted a bigger car or a bigger house or more money. The vision was that we are not ordinary people. We can make a capacitor that will be the best in the world. We can make it at the lowest cost possible, with the least amount of wastage, pleasing our customers the most. And while doing all this, we can still make some money. And the money was always to me something which will follow. It's not the one that I'm chasing. And fortunately, I'm here to tell you that story today. Engage the team because this was not anymore a simple business of manufacturing capacitors. You were engaging and you were putting all your life to one task, that was to make great capacitors. We have a sign outside our exit gate which says, out of this gate go out the best capacitors in the world. And every single employee has the right to say, if you suspect this is not the best capacitor in the world, stop that consignment. You don't need anybody's permission to stop a consignment, stop a machine, or stop a process. If you think this is not as per standard, stop. Nobody is going to ask you questions. Let's try to find a solution. Make it a part of their dream. It's not my dream, it's not the MD's dream or the board's dream. This is a company that belongs to from 45 people and today to 504 people. Be part of the plan, be part of the problem, and part of the solution. So that was the whole. And the idea was that eventually we were not managers anymore, we were leaders, we were workers long, but the way we did it was quite different, and each one became an entrepreneur. Hopefully at the end slide I will tell you something which really excited me then. I've been able to put into practice only now after so many years. That is profit sharing and how we do that. There is a way of you look at, a lot of people call them HR departments, but they're still manpower or time offices. Not too many of them are genuinely human resources because they don't ask them the biggest question: how much am I getting out of this resource, and how much am I putting back into this? So they still remain, in my opinion, manpower. And most companies, especially SMEs, are running at 50% of what we call casual work. These are people who are contractual workers or casual workers. And what is the meaning of casual workers? It's basically, as an entrepreneur, I don't take responsibility for them. As long as my business is going on, I will keep them on. Legal or not legal, I will kick them out the moment I see a drop in my business. But I started focusing more on the word casual. If somebody comes into work, if I go to work every morning saying I'm a casual worker, what kind of work do you expect from me? It has to be casual. How do I make a great company with casual workers? So the first thing was take responsibility. I had the problem to say that if I hire from 45 people to 55, 65 to 100, every one of those families is now my responsibility. I need to use my mind, my heart, and my soul to make sure there's enough business coming year after year after year. So to me, closing down and retrenchment is a big statement of my incompetence. I know a lot of managers across the world will hate this word. They will try to prove you that while they lost your money as an investor, they were doing great and they must get more bonuses. To me, that's shoddy. That's not coming clean at all. If we are such great managers, we have got the best education in the world, we have had the best leaders to lead us, best examples to learn with, why can't I take responsibility for 500 people? And if I can't, I must step down and let somebody else do it who has that responsibility. So that's what I meant by beginning to get, treating the business with people at its core. There is no purpose that business makes money and I take all that money home. I cannot do it sustainably for a long time. I supply to people like Philips and Sony and LGs around the world, and they made me go through a lot of sustainability audits. 2 days, three persons, highly trained in sustainability audits. And their idea of sustainability is, are you paying them what is legally required? That's not sustainable. No company can be legally sustainable. Either you are sustainable at the core of your business or you're not. Okay. Unlimited potential, and that's a belief system. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what we call the breakthrough theory. Big one about it. I was very interested in it one time. It basically says that the way you see me, my identity today is because Dr. Chandwani told you that I'm an entrepreneur, a business associate, etc., etc. So you form an identity. In the 1.5 hours, you have an idea of who I am, and I'll have some idea a little bit about who you are. But that's at the identity level. And that identity is further reinforced by the behavior that you show me, or I show you, by the way I communicate with you. But at the core of this whole thing is one thing, is attitude, but beyond that is what I call a belief. And I began to understand this very early that if you want to change people, unfortunately a lot of training programs and HR programs in the world are focused on one thing, and that is to change the behavior of people. I want you to come on time. I want you to not waste. I want you to save energy. And then giving them the tools and techniques to save that energy, or not drop a piece in the floor, or do a statistical process or a quality check. But I think we are only, the mistake we make there is that we are really just scratching the surface. Because the person really, the identity and the attitude, etc. is built because of my firm belief in something. And that is where we try to make a difference. Our firm belief, and that's an Indian belief, a cue for you to take a note down. If you read the Bhagavad Gita or all our scriptures, there's one thing that they've always said. God is in each one of us. So I don't want to get religious and spiritual about this. But what does it mean? When we say namaste, it means I bow to the God in you. That's the meaning of namaste. If you have doubt that I am somebody's student, I cannot doubt your potential. How do I appraise you quarter after quarter or half year after half year and say you are a stupid worker? You don't understand anything. You are lousy at your work. If this goes on for another 6 months, I will fire you. And that is where I talk about responsibility. That means I don't have firm belief in the fact that this person has unlimited potential. I am doing something wrong as a manager by not being able to tap his potential. Do I at least take 50% of the blame? Do I take that responsibility and say, I'm the one who chose you. I was in your interview panel. I was the one who signed your resume and said, yeah, this guy wins. Then how come after 6 months or 1 year or 2 years, without taking any responsibility, I say, sorry, but you're kicked out, you're useless. Because I have not understood it at a belief level that there is unlimited potential in people. And make no mistake, we've done this with people that are complete losers. We have a color coding system. Best guys get green, blue, etc. The last ones get red and black. Contrary to one of the beliefs that they are all my boards. So as you enter the factory, on the notice board, you have everybody in the place. In the color codes they are. Obviously people feel that this is, initially it was very insulting. The quickest thing you can do is in 6 months I can change that. Get out of the black and red and come in. Come and share with the manager and ask him, what are the 2, 3 things that you want me to do If I do them, I will not be a black or red anymore. So it became a very objective discussion. And the manager had no right to refuse time for this person. Anybody who was a red or black had a 24 hours, he could call me on my cell or anybody's cell. Let's say, I have a problem, I'm not able to do this, can you come and help me now? Because I was supposed to do that. Because in 6 months we wanted to get them out of it. There are hardly any reds and blacks in our country, ever since. So you can do that, provided you believe in their potential. A lot of people talk of training, but we talk of stereotypes. Which means, where do you want to be 5 years from now? A lot of big companies have these very, but please understand that when I talk about an SME, I have an HR department which is 3 people. HR manager, one guy who is basically in charge of all pay slips and attendance and leaves, everything is only one guy. And there is a third guy who basically also takes care of the 5S or the housekeeping of the whole environment. Just 3 people are running this 500 people show. So you don't need many people, as long as I think the principles are clear to everybody. And we are discussing it with that same level of thinking. How do we ingrain this? We have a prayer every morning at 9 o'clock. It's a 24-hour factory, we have 3 shifts. But at 9 o'clock we have the largest number of people there, about 220 people who report at the 9 o'clock shift. We now are running out of space. So out in the corridor, even in this heat, we are all there at 9 o'clock and we sing a prayer. It's a secular prayer. It doesn't pray to any particular God. It's not Hindu or Muslim. It prays to the Almighty to say that grant me the wisdom to be able to achieve customer satisfaction today. To be able to learn from my mistakes, to be able to waste less resources, so that my impact on the planet is better or is less harmful. And let me work in such a way that whoever families we touch, they are touched with happiness. That's all. These are the 4 visions we have, or the 4 prayers we have. And initially it will seem funny to people who join this prayer. They will have different kinds of reactions to it. It's a purely voluntary prayer. If you don't want to attend it, you don't have to attend it. You have been at 9 o'clock or in the factory. When you attend this for 5 minutes, and then there's the thought for the day, which in my opinion is a very, very powerful way of communicating. So here's the story of one person, which I think I have used before. It's a housekeeping person whose job it is. So there is a list, everybody is called one by one. And he has to speak in front of the 200, 220 people on any subject that he is interested in. It could be politics, it could be what he saw on television.